Hey guys, Zoliax here and welcome to a new Airlines Manager video. In this episode I'm going to be going through my comparison of the A380, the various variants of the 747 and the Ilyushin il-96-300. So if I flip over to my spreadsheet, and at the top here you can see I have run a simulation for all of these aircraft, 7 of them in total. The only 747 that is missing is the 747 SP. I didn't have one available to me and I didn't really want to spend the money getting one. For this I was flying from Addis Ababa to somewhere in the Philippines, I think it was. But they've all flown the same route, so all these prices come from the same route. Obviously, because the demand wasn't quite high enough to run all 7 aircraft in one go, I did run them separately over various days. However, I did not change any of my ticket pricings. I also had no change to my ancillary revenues, or any of my statistics had changed at all during this time. I then let the aircraft run up a bit of wear and age, did a full D-check on all 7 of these aircraft, so they were all back at exactly the same start point. Let them run, all of them at the same time. Obviously I was in an absolute massive negative demand for these, but they were still flying the route, gaining the age, getting the wear, for me to get the A check and D check costs after the same number of flights. So as you can probably quite clearly see from the top section here, the more seats you have, the more money you make. Hey, you're a rocket scientist. So obviously, because the A380 carries, over 100 more passengers than the next closest, naturally, each run it will earn more money. However, when we take into account the ancillary revenues, looking down here, you can quite clearly see this 747-200 blows it miles out of the park. Considering it takes 250 less people, it's gaining an extra $200,000 just in ancillary revenues. And then if you look at the Ilyushin, 360,000. Even that, the Ilyushin trails behind the 747-200 and the 747-100 in terms of ancillary revenue per person. It's not far off the 100B and the 300, to be fair, when you take into account the number of passengers it's taking. Obviously, if you multiplied that by 3, you'll be trumping the A380 quite easily, pretty much on par with the 300. But then, for the just ahead of the 100B, but miles behind the 200B. However, when we take into account how much it initially costs, obviously if you are purchasing it through the app every time, the 300, 200 and 100 747s variant will cost you AM coins. There is, however, an option to do a larger one-off payment, which I shall show you here. If you go to the web version of your account, click on the shop, go to aircraft, you do have an option to buy for 200 AM coins a one-off license to purchase these aircraft without having to spend any AM coins ever again. So obviously for most of these, if you plan on buying 10 or more of them, it will be cheaper for you to buy one of these licenses. This obviously applies to every single classic aircraft in the game. Some of them are a little bit cheaper. As you can see, the DC-3 is only 100 coins. The Concorde even at 350. but most of them are around the 200 mark, with the exception of a couple, which normally it is 10 times whatever the in-game AM coin cost is. Let's come back out of that. So what I've done then is I have taken the result per flight and divided it by the number of seats that the aircraft carries. As you can quite clearly see here, the 747-200B pretty much trumps everything when it comes to result per seat, closely followed by, well, not that closely followed, but by the 300. Then comes the Aleutian il-96-300. So in terms of aircraft that don't cost AM coins, it is the highest result per seat. The Dash 100 comes behind that. Then the 747-400, and then the 747-8i, and finally in last place the A380 as a result per seat. But when we take that into account, how much you actually paid for the aircraft in the first place, the Aleutian comes out on top in result, how much you gain per flight as opposed to how much you spent per flight, spent purchasing the aircraft in the first place. So the Aleutian comes out on top for that. Again, the 747-200B, this is obviously negating the AM coins that you have to use as well. The Dash 300 and the Dash 100B not far behind that. 747-400, and then the A380 followed finally by the 8i. As I said, I did a D-check on these to make sure they were all starting at the exact same point, put all 7 aircraft onto the route and left them running. And these are the A-check costs and the D-check costs that came out the other end. And when you're taking the amount that the checks cost to the number of seats you have, you can quite clearly see here the Aleutian is a lot cheaper per person, per seat. Again, followed by the 747-200B, working all the way up to pretty much the, well, for Tycoon mode, obviously using D-checks only. The 747-8i comes off worst out of that list, and those retro aircraft don't do too well on the A checks, but that's just because their wear rate is higher. It's a bit weird how it works out like that, but obviously the older the aircraft, the more it wears, and because A checks only take into account the wear, because that's all it's removing, it doesn't do anything to the age rating. You know, those come out on top because they have the worst wear rating. D-checks, obviously, because these all take into account the initial cost of the aircraft, even though the newer aircraft don't wear as fast, because they cost so much to purchase, you end up paying more on your maintenances anyway. I did a little ratio then. So this is for professional mode where you're doing A checks primarily. Again, the higher the number here, the better the aircraft, because that means the more money you're getting in and the least money you're paying out on your A checks give you a higher figure. So these are obviously now all on a level playing field. You know, I've taken into account obviously the divisions, the different size of aircraft. So the Aleutian quite clearly comes out on top, followed by the 747-200B. Not too far behind that is the 747-8i, and then comes the 747-400, then the 100B, then the 300, and in last place in professional mode is the A380. The D-checked ones, this is obviously primarily aimed towards those tycoon players. Again, the Aleutian comes out massively on top when it comes to result to cost ratio. And again, the 747-200B not far behind it. The -300 and -400 747s pretty much level pegging there when it comes to the tycoon mode. Obviously the advantage that the 747-400 has is it does have that higher range. The 747-100 then comes behind that, closely followed by the A380, and in last place is the 747-8i. So with that in mind, I have then shown here, so for routes that are up to 11,500 kilometers, your option is the Aleutian. This is purely for money making. If you want the structural profit, making money, these are the aircraft you go for. So the Aleutian, for anything up to 11,500, between 11,500 and 13,010 kilometers, the 747-200B is your go-to option. Obviously, if you don't want to pay the AM coins, 747-400 will then be your option, and that continues then up to 13,454 kilometers. Anything over that, up to the 15,556 kilometers, that's when you bring in your A380 as your option. When it comes to that kind of range, you're fighting between the A380 and the 747-8i, and yeah, the A380 just about trumps it. Not by far, but it has slightly higher range than the 8i, I believe, as well. But yeah, so the A380, and that's, you know, a good option for the really long haul circuits. But yeah, so anything between that 13,454 and 11,500, go for the 747s instead. I was a bit surprised actually. I went to have a look at the rank 1 player just to see what he runs. This is the rank 1 player in professional mode, just so you're aware. As you can see, he only runs 1,163 A380s compared to 459,821 Aleutians. That just shows, you know, all the top rank players. If you go look at any of the top rank players, you'll find that, you know, they're all running hundreds of thousands of the Aleutians, just because, you know, these numbers, you can see how it's quite significantly ahead of everything else. I was quite surprised to see he hasn't gone for the 200B. He's obviously bought a license of the 300B. The 300 and the 200, there's not a massive difference between them. I mean, you do earn more money with the 200B, but I do believe you actually get a bit more range off of the 300, which might be why he's gone for that option instead. Without looking, I don't know off the top of my head. But yeah, no 8Is, again, they're useless, and 100Bs. Yeah, if you're going to buy a license for the older 747s, you're obviously better off just doing one of them. I would recommend the 747-200. From all the testing that I've done, and this one here as well, you know, it comes out on top in both Tycoon and Professional when it comes to the 747s. So obviously when you can't use the Aleutian, you know, the 200B is the one to go for. But hopefully that's been informational for you. Obviously everything here is for those people who want to have the highest profit margin, so your structural profit, which is obviously what you are ranked on. That's my advice for that. Obviously if you're playing for realism, then you probably won't use any of those aircraft at all anyway, because, well, nobody uses the Aleutians really ever, for that matter. The 747s are pretty much all being retired apart from the freighters. and there are only a handful of airlines that are still operating the A380s. Most of them are being phased out over the next decade or so. Anyway, but yeah, hopefully that's been informative for you, and I will catch you again next time. Thanks for watching.